In my next reflection, I want to discuss the human ego and how it controls everything we do without even knowing it. Yet the only way to cover the ego and its effect on you and on society is to learn the history of the concept and in turn our deeper selves. The human ego weaves its presence through every dimension of our existence, acting as both a silent architect and a boisterous performer within the theater of our minds. It is a force so intricately entwined with our sense of self that we can scarcely separate its workings from the very core of identity. Over the vast centuries of human endeavor to learn our place in the universe, the stories, philosophies, and psychological theories surrounding the ego have grown from ancient seeds into a sprawling forest of ideas, where each branch casts new light and shadow across the landscape of the human experience. Yet, to truly understand who we are and the nature of our ambitions, conflicts, and connections, we must first grapple with this mysterious and ever-changing force that lives deep within our psyche. Delving into the depths of history, we encounter the first stirrings of self-awareness reflected in myth, ritual, and early philosophy. Though the explicit term ego would not be coined until much later, ancient civilizations discerned the presence of an internal force that mediated our desires, our restraints, and even our self-reflections. In the Upanishads, the sacred texts of ancient India, the distinction between the true self, the Atman, and the individual ego, the Ahamkara, is made explicit. The Atman is the undying, universal consciousness said to underlie all existence, whereas Ahamkara is the individuated self that mistakes itself for the whole. The spiritual journey in these texts becomes a drama between these two poles of existence. It becomes the pursuit of one's liberation through the dissolution of the ego's illusions, its attachments, and its relentless claims to separateness. However, a similar tension emerged in the philosophical traditions of ancient Greece. Socrates, the enigmatic sage, famously instructed his followers to know thyself, a challenge that has echoed through the ages. This Delphic maxim was not simply a call to self-knowledge, but an invitation to uncover the veiled workings of the inner life. A life shaped by pride, passion, and the persistent urge to assert one's significance. Plato, inspired by Socratic questioning, fashioned his tripartite soul, likening the human psyche to a charioteer guiding two horses, one of reason, the other of unruly desire. The charioteer's task mirrors our own desires today, or basically to balance the forces within, to restrain egoic impulses while honoring higher wisdom. In these myths and allegories, the roots of the ego's conceptual history twist and intertwine with the earliest explorations of what it means to be human. The Romans inherited and expanded upon these contemplations. Thinkers like Cicero and Seneca pondered the passions, the dangers of pride, and the cultivation of an inner citadel, which was a metaphorical fortress of reason and virtue, protected from the tempests of fortune. The pursuit of Stoic tranquility, which the Roman philosophers so admired, was in no small part a quest to tame the unruly ego that drove our personal chariots, to avoid enslavement by fleeting emotions or public opinion. This tradition of self-mastery would echo into the Christian era, where the ego became not only a psychological concern but a spiritual one. Early Christian theology, deeply influenced by Greek thought. I know, right? There's going to be some angry comments over that fact. Regarded the ego as both a stumbling block and a crucible for transformation. The sin of pride, regarded as the queen of all vices, embodied the perils of egoic inflation. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, offers a window into the soul's interior drama, chronicling his own wrestling with desire, ambition, and the pull toward transcendence. Augustine's unflinching self-examination set a new standard for Western introspection, painting the ego as both a source of suffering and the raw material for spiritual growth. The tension between humility and pride, between surrender and self-assertion, became a central theme in Christian mysticism, where the ultimate aim was the death of the ego in favor of union with the divine. Now, while Yeshua, whose teachings somewhat mirror those found in the earlier Buddhist tradition, Saint Isa, anyone here comes more angry comments. Joking aside, he is never quoted as having used the term ego as it is understood in modern psychology. Many of his teachings directly address the underlying attitudes and behaviors associated with the ego, such as pride, self-exaltation, and the desire for recognition. For example, in Matthew chapter 23, verse 12, Yeshua taught, "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." This passage highlights the spiritual peril of egoic pride and the virtue of humility. Then, similarly, Matthew chapter 6 begins with Yeshua cautioning against performing righteous acts to be seen by others, urging his followers to pray and give in secret. "But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." Another relevant teaching is found in Luke 9:23, where Yeshua says, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." This call to self-denial is often interpreted as an invitation to transcend the ego's demands and align oneself with a higher purpose. Through these and other passages, Yeshua consistently emphasized humility, selflessness, and the importance of focusing on inner transformation over outward displays, the core themes that resonate deeply with the concept of overcoming the ego. Before we continue, if you like this video and support what this channel is doing, please click the like button and then subscribe to the channel. Now, back to my reflection. As the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, attention turned once again to the individual, but not as a fallen creature, instead as a source of creative potential. The Renaissance spirit, animated by new discoveries in art, science, and philosophy, nurtured an unprecedented focus on the self. The emergence of perspective in painting, the flourishing of autobiography, and the celebration of human achievement all reflected a subtle shift in thinking where the ego became not merely an obstacle to salvation, but an engine of progress. By the time René Descartes penned his Meditations in the 17th century, the self ascended to a new philosophical height when he stated, "I think, therefore I am," which became a rallying cry for the importance of individual consciousness. For Descartes, self-awareness was the bedrock of knowledge, a certainty upon which all else must be built. Yet, even here, the self was still entangled with metaphysical questions, its boundaries not yet clearly drawn by the science of psychology. The philosophical and psychological revolutions of the 19th and 20th centuries would bring the ego into sharper focus. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer described the will as the fundamental force of human nature. He believed it was an urge both blind and irresistible, manifesting in ceaseless striving and self-delusion. In his wake, Friedrich Nietzsche dissected the ego's role as both the instigator of greatness and the architect of self-deception. For Nietzsche, the ego was entangled with the will to power, the drive that animates all living things. Yet, he warned that unchecked ego could lead to nihilism, self-aggrandizement, and the collapse of higher values. These philosophical explorations found new resonance in William James, whose pioneering work in psychology distinguished between the I or the knower and the me or the known. James's insights laid the groundwork for a scientific investigation into the structures of self-identity. No figure looms larger in the modern history of the ego than Sigmund Freud. Freud's theories, both revolutionary and contentious, transformed the landscape of inner life. He proposed a tripartite structure: the id, representing the raw, instinctual drives; the superego, embodying internalized moral standards and social expectations; and the ego, situated precariously between, tasked with mediating the demands of desire, conscience, and reality. In Freud's model, the ego is the conscious self, forever negotiating compromise and deploying the defense mechanisms of denial, repression, projection, and rationalization, all meant to protect itself from anxiety and internal conflict. The ego's function is thus twofold. It is a seat of identity and agency, but also a master of illusion, forever crafting narratives to preserve its fragile sense of coherence. Freud's ideas did not go unchallenged. Carl Jung, once his collaborator, ventured further into the depths of the psyche. Jung regarded the ego as the center of consciousness, but he insisted it was only a small island in a vast, largely unconscious sea. The process of individuation, or becoming whole, required embracing not only the conscious ego, but also the shadow, the repressed and unacknowledged parts of the self. Jung's vision cast the ego as both guide and obstacle on the journey towards self-realization. As psychology evolved, so too did the lens through which the ego was viewed. Humanistic psychologists such as Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers shifted focus from pathology to potential. Rogers saw the ego as the self-concept, the internalized story we tell about who we are, shaped by both authentic experience and the judgments of others. This self-concept is not fixed. It can distort reality to preserve a positive sense of self, but it can also grow, fostering creativity, authenticity, and deeper connection when aligned with genuine experience. Maslow's hierarchy of needs placed esteem and self-actualization at the pinnacle of human aspiration. The ego's healthy functioning enables the pursuit of self-worth and achievement, but true fulfillment, Maslow cautioned, lies beyond the ego's narrow concerns in the realization of one's highest potential, a state he called self-actualization. Eastern philosophies cast the ego in an altogether different light, offering a counterpoint to the Western focus on individuality. Buddhist doctrine teaches that the ego is a construct, an ephemeral swirl of thoughts, sensations, and memories mistaken for a permanent self. Clinging to this illusion is the cause of suffering. Liberation, or nirvana, is attained through the dissolution of egoic attachment. Mindfulness and meditation become radical acts of deconstruction, revealing the impermanence of all things and the interconnectedness of all beings. So the legacy of the ego is not confined to philosophical speculation or psychological theory. Instead, it reverberates through the everyday dramas of life. The ego shapes perception, amplifies praise, bristles at criticism, and yearns for validation. It is the voice that insists, "I deserve more," that clings to grievances, that fears vulnerability and diminishment. In relationships, the ego is both architect and saboteur, building bonds and erecting walls in equal measure. Pride and defensiveness can turn a simple apology or act of forgiveness into an epic struggle. Yet without the ego's strength, we would lack the boundaries and agency that make meaningful connections possible. The push and pull between assertion and surrender plays out in every encounter, coloring the stories we tell ourselves about love, success, and failure. In the wider world, the ego operates on a collective scale. Societies and cultures, too, possess their own forms of ego, or collective identities forged through nationality, religion, ideology, and shared myth. Ancient Egypt enshrined the ego in the figure of the pharaoh, the divine king who embodied cosmic order and stood at the pinnacle of worldly and spiritual power. Greek city-states wove tales of heroes whose hubris often brought about their downfall. Roman emperors, crowned as gods, pursued glory and dominion, their exploits a testament to both the splendor and peril of unchecked ego. These stories reverberate in modern times, where nations and movements animated by collective pride and insecurity vie for recognition and dominance. Nationalism, tribalism, and partisanship, often magnified by media and digital platforms, echo the ancient dramas of ego on a new stage. The dance of the ego is visible in the smallest details and the largest trends of modern life. On social media, the metrics of likes, followers, and shares offer our egos a dazzling stage, intensifying cycles of comparison, validation, and insecurity. The pursuit of status, whether wealth, fame, or power, can become an endless treadmill of mental suffering, leaving the ego ever hungrier, never truly satisfied. Even in altruistic endeavors, the ego seeks subtly to assert itself, finding validation in moral superiority or public recognition. Religious practices, too, often serve as battlegrounds for egoic struggles. The spectacle of public piety, criticized by Yeshua in his teachings, as we covered earlier, illustrates the ease with which spiritual acts can become performances for the sake of self. His admonition to pray in secret was less about the mechanics of prayer and more about the intent, or about quieting the ego's demand to be seen and lauded by others. But now comes the twist in our tale. Despite its many pitfalls, the ego is not a villain to be slain. Rather, it is a power to be understood, integrated, and balanced. The ego confers identity and agency. It enables us to set boundaries, pursue ambitions, and develop a moral conscience. Without the ego's strength, we would drift, undefined and unmotivated, which we all do at times. But when ego becomes inflated, when it mistakes its constructs for absolute truth, it engenders suffering, isolation, and conflict. The history of human thought is in many ways a chronicle of our struggle to harness this force of the ego and to avoid being ruled by it or destroyed by it. Throughout history, philosophers, sages, and mystics have offered pathways for harmonizing or transcending the ego. The Stoics of ancient Rome counseled humility, acceptance, and the cultivation of inner tranquility. Their practice of negative visualization, meaning contemplating loss and impermanence, was designed to loosen the ego's attachments and foster resilience in the face of fate. Christian mystics such as Meister Eckhart and Teresa of Avila spoke of the death of the ego not as annihilation, but as the precondition for mystical union with something greater than the self. Their writings reveal a paradox. Only by letting go of the ego's need for control can a deeper, more expansive self emerge. Eastern traditions, meanwhile, emphasize the transformative power of mindfulness, meditation, and compassion. Mindfulness invites us to observe thoughts and emotions without identifying with them, revealing the fleeting and insubstantial nature of the ego. Meditation disciplines the mind, allowing us to witness the rise and fall of egoic impulses, to loosen their grip and open ourselves to deeper awareness. Compassion toward oneself and others often softens the ego's armor, fostering connection and dissolving the illusion of separateness. These practices, once confined to monastic settings, have spread widely into modern life, offering tools for navigating the challenges of contemporary existence. Ultimately, living beyond your ego does not mean erasing your individuality or ambition. Instead, it means seeing through the ego's illusions, cultivating self-awareness, and orienting one's life toward values that transcend narrow self-interest. Love, wisdom, justice, and the well-being of all emerge as guiding stars, illuminating the path beyond egoic limitation. The journey is lifelong, marked by both setbacks and revelations, as the ego continually adapts, resists, and transforms. Yet, in this ongoing process, we find not only the possibility of personal fulfillment, but the seeds of a more compassionate and harmonious world. If you enjoyed this reflection, please like and subscribe to my channel. And if you would truly like to support me or wish to learn more about humanity's hidden history and Yeshua's secret teachings, you can purchase your copy of Forbidden Genesis, The Untold Story of Man in Forbidden Genesis Part 2, The Secret Books of Yeshua, today. The links are in the description box below. Thank you so much for your time.